Hello and welcome to today's CPYB exam prep session. The content covered in this presentation is divided by principal knowledge category and will focus on a number of topics in each of those categories. As we progress through the presentation, please feel free to utilize the chat feature below with any questions. Questions will be addressed and discussed before moving on to the next section of content. We anticipate the session to be just over 2 hours in length, and it is being recorded for future educational purposes. A recording of this will be accessible on demand through the CPYB website. You will also receive a short survey in the next few days to provide us with your feedback, and we hope to hear from you. Please help me welcome today's presenter, Tim Hoving. Tim is the NYBA Board of Directors, CPYB Advisor Council member, BCYBA member, charter manager and lead instructor for San Juan Sailing and Yachting. He has experience of 100+ ton USCG master's license, an ASA instructor evaluator. He has 25 years of boating career, and he has been CPYB certified since 2008. Tim, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right, thank you, Trish, and thank you everybody for joining the webcast today. Sounds like we got about 35 people. I'm an instructor, so this is kind of my venue here. So I'm glad that you came in and joined us. So we'll get started now. And you've learned a little bit about me from Trish. There we go. So, yep, I've been at this about 25 years in boating, been instructing and selling boats and meeting a lot of people out there, just like I'm sure you do in your own vocation. So hopefully this will be very beneficial to you in prepping you for the exam. I know some of you thought this was the exam. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but this will be a prep for the exam, and we'll give you the link here shortly on how to set up for that and get ready to take the exam. Okay, so the learning objectives today, hopefully at the end of the session, you'll be able to gain an enhanced understanding on the variety of principal knowledge topics, feel more confident demonstrating the knowledge when taking the exam. So the different areas that we're going to cover with the prep here, we'll cover laws and regulations, technical knowledge, yacht broker's responsibility, transactions, and ethics. And hopefully each one of you has already purchased the guide. That's the textbook that we're going to be using for today's prep. And hopefully you have one of those at hand, and that'll be very, very helpful for the exam as well. We'll cover just a few of the questions that you may encounter on the test. You will encounter on the test, but there are many more that are covered within the guide. This just kind of gives you a format and how the test is laid out. So principal knowledge topics, we're going to talk about U.S., state, and local laws. Each state has their own typical different types of laws. Some of them are the same, some are a little different. It's good if you're selling boats in different states that you are up on some of the differences between the states. We're going to talk about international law, and I'm a BCYBA yacht broker, and when I moved to Canada 3 years ago, it was quite different. Selling boats up there, terminology is different. There's lots of differences between US and Canada as well as Europe, and so that's going to be covered within the guide. US federal regulations, your documentation, your vessel versus state regulations and state registration. There's going to be questions on design and technical knowledge, yacht construction materials, a lot of new materials that have come out lately. Marine systems, boy, there's all kinds of new marine systems in the last 10 or 20 years. Standards and classifications, marine navigation and terminology. Hopefully some of you are avid sailors and yachters, and you're up on the latest navigation terminology. Rules of the road will be covered. Charting will be covered as well. We're going to talk about listing broker responsibilities and the selling broker responsibilities. A lot of those overlap, but a lot of them are specific to either the listing broker or the selling broker. It's a team when you're selling boats. We're going to talk about fiduciary responsibilities, contracts and documents, the closing process and how that's different in certain areas. For example, in Canada, you don't use a documentation title company. Up there, they use a lawyer and use an escrow account. Then the last thing we'll talk about is ethics. So let's talk a little bit more about the exam. There's 145 multiple choice questions, and a lot of the questions are very, very similar, but you're going to want to choose the best answer. So I'm on the CAC, the Curriculum Advisory Committee, and we go over the test regularly and find questions that have problems. People that, hey, those are two right answers. So we'll put in a dummy answer there that's definitely wrong. And so we're trying to make the test more user-friendly, easier for you to understand and to pass. And when you do take the exam, it's going to take about 3 hours to complete. Unlike when I took the test, you'll have immediate results. I had to wait about 3 weeks before I realized I passed or failed. And then if you do not make it the first time, you're able to retest up to 2 times, and you can do that within a year. Okay, here's the exam score report. So of the 14 different areas that you'll be tested on, it'll show you your score as well as the group score of the people that you're taking the test with, as well as the state and the federal, overall the nation, and what the average score is there. So didn't have that when I took the test. This is something new that's been developed, and it's very helpful. When I took the test, fortunately I passed it my first time, but I had no clue of what I missed or what I was weak in, so that I could go back and study. But with this system now that they have, you can go back and see the areas that you need to study a little bit more to be proficient in the exam. Okay, we talked about signing up for the exam. So on the CPYB website, step 1 is find the window there, get certified, go down to CPYB exam, click on that, and then there'll be dates and registration, and then you can get an online registration, step 3, and usually takes about 3 days from the time that you request the exam to the time that you actually are able to receive the date and the time of the test. Okay, we're going to talk about the first section here, laws and regulations. Okay, the sales and use taxes in the state of Washington, where I live. If you have a boat, say, coming in from Oregon, and they don't have a sales tax there. However, if you keep the boat in Washington, you are subject to what's called a use tax. And the use tax varies depending on the region that you're in. Seattle is a little bit over 10% for that tax. Where I live in Bellingham and Northwest Washington, it's only 8.7%. So they get you one way or another. If you put a boat into charter, you're not required to pay that sales or use tax until the boat comes out of charter. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Dealers and customers' obligations, the difference between states, federal versus state requirements, and Canadian too, different requirements. Where to get and refer a client for advice, and we're going to talk about U.S. Customs, state and local, foreign registry, and U.S. Coast Guard registered vessels. Record keeping. So there always has to be a paper trail, and who is responsible? Well, ultimately, the listing broker initially is responsible to make sure that the paper trail is followed and there's records and record keeping. Then it's passed on to usually a documentation service, and they take over. They do the search for liens, tax payments. They collect the funds and disperse them. And there's filing requirements. So you have state required procedures for vessel registration, and of course the sales and use tax collection. So vessel registration and state titling, what's the difference? Well, you have the option when your client purchases a boat, either to title it with the state that it's been purchased in, or else get it documented from the Coast Guard. Most large vessels are documented by the Coast Guard, and vessels that are put into a charter operation, which I've worked at for many, many years, it's very advantageous to have a U.S. Coast Guard documentation. A lot of the charter boats that I work with go across the border into Canada and back, and so having that documentation is important. Value and purpose of the documentation, foreign registry, cruising permits, how limitations, who, and advantages. And then of course there's the customs duty. So if you're having a client that's purchasing a boat across either in Europe or in Canada or Mexico, a lot of times customs comes into play depending on where the boat is built. If it's built in the US, Canada, or Mexico, of course, with the old NAFTA agreement and the continuation of that, there is no customs. But if it's a foreign laid keel, say in China, there can be serious customs duty that's due. Okay, we're going to talk about dinghy and jet ski and tenders. So those are all things that you're going to be selling and have clients that want to buy. So different regulations for registration, foreign registry, cruising permits. Usually they're tied to the vessel. And when they're entering the US under their own power, there's a little different criteria there. So make sure your client is aware of that if they're bringing in a dinghy, a jet ski, or a tender, that it's part of the vessel, that they don't bring it in under its own powers. Different criteria there, and it can get kind of sticky. And we're going to talk about broker and salesperson licensing. So as many of you are aware, there are 2 states in the United States that you need to have certification. I just recently received my Florida state certification for selling boats. And it was a little bit of a process. You have to be fingerprinted. There's an application that has to be approved. You have to be sponsored by a company, and you also have to have a $10,000 bond. In California, there's actually a second test over and above the CPYB test that you need to take to become a yacht broker in California. And out-of-state brokers are not typically allowed to sell vessels in Florida or California. That's not completely enforced, but it is a rule. And if you are selling from outside of those states, you may find that you're out of luck as far as bringing a client to one of the brokers in Florida or California. We'll talk about international laws, the value-added tax, what that is, and it applies to European and EU countries, the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, the MC regulations, safety of life at sea, SOLAS, and regulations going back to when the Titanic had its tragic end, and MARPOL regulations, that's marine pollution. So the marine pollution of 1973 and 1978 treaties, and the International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships. So as you well know, plastic and oil are not allowed to be dumped anywhere in the world. And that came from the MARPOL Convention. And there's federal regulations agency. the FCC and licenses and types. And if you do take a boat from the US into Canada, you are required to have an FCC license to operate a VHF radio in Canada. US Coast Guard administrative and documentation. They have records, discharges, maritime liens, markings, hull identification, HIN, crewing, charter, boat regs, and licensing. And then there's the safety and gear requirements, and a good idea when you're showing boats and when you're doing sea trials that you go through that, the safety and the gear checklist. Make sure you have life jackets, one for each person, one for the owner, maybe his wife, and maybe anybody that's coming along. I've been on several boats where life jackets were not there and had to go out and purchase life jackets to make sure that we were safe for a sea trial. Make sure the flares are up to date. If you are boarded by the Coast Guard, make sure that you've got a sound making device and the lights work. And so safety should be paramount in everything you do. And construction, and then mortgage requirements to record a lien. And if you see anything in yellow on any of these slides, pay special attention to those items. Secret liens, you're going to have a quick test question that will deal with secret liens. So in the guide, it talks about secret liens. Make sure you're up to speed on that. In the federal regulations, we got US Customs and duty collected on foreign registered boats, calculating duties, and multiple duty issues. A lot of times your titling company will be on top of this, but you as a broker need to make sure that it's taken care of, and the buck stops with you. Even though there are other people helping you and assisting you, the buck stops with the broker. And when you're going into a foreign country, you have a consumption entry CBP, Customs and Border Protection Form 7501. We're going to take a look at that. Immigration requirements when you're crossing over on the border. Make sure you have a passport with you. I am a permanent resident in Canada, so I'm able to travel back and forth without any problems. And in fact, the last 2 years with COVID, I delivered about 36 boats back and forth across the US-Canadian border with that status. And being a licensed captain, I was in the marine industry and did not require a COVID test. And so that made it very easy for me to move boats back and forth. And many of the Canadian owners were not able to come down into the States to view their boats or to check on their boats. And so I did a lot of that too for the Canadians. And then of course there's the state and US territorial waters for regulations. Here's the consumption form called entry summary. Normally you're going to hire a border broker if you're bringing boats back and forth across the border. So in my case, we have a border broker in Canada for bringing boats into Canada, and then also one in the States when you're bringing boats vice versa. And normally your border broker will take care of these forms. There's another form called the 1300, which is called a clearance form and an entrance form that needs to be filled out for customs when you're coming back and forth. Some of these forms can be very tedious, and I sometimes can't find the HIN number. How do we know this is the boat that you're delivering? So you need to review these forms, make sure they're correct, make sure they have the right numbers on there and values and everything like that. Otherwise, when you get to the border, it can be time consuming. Okay, local laws and regulations. So you need to be aware of the local issues that you have in your own area, aware of the license requirements, business licenses, tax registrations, and tax regulations. So each state and area have their own idiosyncrasies in those areas. Okay, so let's The client is purchasing a non-documented vessel and wishes to federally document the vessel. Who is the best equipped to prepare paperwork associated with the documentation? Is it the listing broker, the selling broker, a documentation service, or an attorney? Now that, if you're in Canada, I would say D would be a good answer. However, the best answer is the documentation service. So in the States and in Washington, where I live, I use several documentation companies, and they do a great job of paperwork, and they're high detailed people. They do it quickly and efficiently, and I rely on them 100%. And so the documentation service is your best friend. And when I first got into brokering, one of the brokers I worked with introduced me to a documentation service, and he said it's like a Venetian blind. Everything comes down in order, and when the job is done, everything is done correctly. And as a broker, you don't need to worry about it, but still the buck stops with you. You have to make sure everything is done correctly and in order. So customers expect us to know the boats as brokers. So we should know about yacht design, construction methods and materials, boat repair, maintenance, operating systems, the laws, regulations, and the list goes on. And you should be very much involved in the survey process. So you must be intimately aware of the different surveys. So you may have a hull survey, a mechanical survey, and in the case of sailboats, you have a rigging survey. And you as a broker need to be on top of each one of those surveyors, making sure they're doing their job, they're communicating the different deficiencies they may find in the vessel. And so you're working with both the buyer and the seller a lot of times through the critical phases of this part of the transaction, which get kind of tedious. A company I used to work for, we would do what's called a pre-inspection of the boat. So it's not a survey when you get two parties together, but actually a pre-listing survey. And so the owner would know exactly what he needed to take care of prior to getting into a transaction with a client, with a buyer. And usually the owner would either say, okay, I'm going to take care of those problems, or no, it's going to be part of the negotiation process. But at least it gives you a baseline when you start with a boat. And it's great as a listing broker that you can hand a survey to a prospective buyer and say, hey, we've already gone the first step. Here's the survey. This is what we found. This is the valuation of what the surveyor has come up with. And usually that's very close to the listing price. So you don't get into an argument after the fact when the survey comes in and the survey is much lower, which has happened to me, than what the listing price is. So it takes a lot of the guesswork out of selling boats. You got the survey process, and it's great for going to Yacht World too, because you have all the information on the survey. You've got the displacement, the tank volume. You've got all the different measurements of the boat, the type of prop, how many blades. You can take that right off the survey, and it makes it really easy to do the Yacht World listing. So I missed that, and I may try to start that up again with the company I work with now, because it really saves a lot of time selling boats, and people appreciate that you're upfront with them. You're giving them what's wrong with the boat ahead of time, and they don't have to pay for a survey to find out. Okay, Trish, any questions?
I don't see any at the moment. Anybody have any questions you want to throw in the chat real quick? All right, Mr. Tim, moving on.
Okay, we'll move on. All right. We'll go to the next section, technical knowledge. And this one can be a little tricky with all the new technology out there. different fiberglass and composites, pros and cons, osmotic blistering. And I've found almost every boat that I've ever had a survey on has had one form or another of blisters, whether it may be small paint blisters or within the structure of the boat. There was a boat builder here in Bellingham, I won't mention any names, but they used a fire retardant in their building process, and the boats look like golf balls after a few years. And actually the ones that have gone down to warmer climates, it accentuates it, they're faster. The blisters are just growing like crazy, and it's not a structural problem, but very much an aesthetic problem. And a lot of these boats have to be shaved and refiberglassed, and sometimes you never get rid of the blisters. But you're going to find blisters, and if you do find blisters, you know, don't hide them. Don't try and make it out like it's not a big deal. Let the buyer know, hey, this boat has blisters. Delamination, moisture intrusion. So a lot of the surveyors that come out, they have moisture meters, and so a lot of the boats, if they're out, especially here in the wet Pacific Northwest, you're going to find moisture intrusion if they're not kept in a boathouse. So that's a problem up here. Crazing on windows and hatches, that's fairly typical on some of the older boats. And the differences between the polyester and vinyl lester resin. So you need to know what those differences are. And the use of Kevlar, a lot of the boats, the Bavaria uses Kevlar in their keels, and the new racing boats, carbon fiber and other materials. And then be familiar with what vacuum bagging is in the boat building process. And infusion, and the acronym SCRIMP, Seaman Composites Resin Infusion Molding Process. Be aware of how that works and how are fiberglass boats built. Up in the Pacific Northwest, we've got several boat builders. In fact, the company I work for, CL Yachts, we've taken over a company called Northern Marine, and we just built a 57-foot trawler, and we're in the process of building a 64-foot trawler. And as a broker, I would encourage you to take a tour if you have the availability of boat building companies in your area. Up here, we have Nordic Tugs, we've got American Tugs, and like I said, Northern Marine, Ranger Tugs are built nearby. It's very, very helpful to go through there, ask questions, and you can actually see the process of putting boats together and ask about the different composites and materials that go into those boats. And I have found that the workers and the administration in these boat building facilities, you know, they want to share their knowledge with you, and it's a great way to be able to pass it on to your client. Hey, I went and visited the factory. This is how this boat is built, and very beneficial. So I would encourage you to do that. Then we're talking about metal and methods, so types of where they're used. So you've got aluminum, steel, stainless steel, steel rust, oxidation, different types of steel. Of course, Chinese steel is a no-no. Aluminum, corrosion, and weight-saving steel. The underwater effects on fittings, and quite a difference between freshwater effect and saltwater effect. So if your boats are in freshwater, you're not going to have as much rust or corrosion or crevice corrosion as you will in saltwater. And then there's different testing procedures. And again, the yellow there on the slide, the galvanic corrosion of dissimilar metals. So you need to understand what that is between aluminum, stainless steel, and electrolysis and the current between metal objects. So more prevalent in salt water. That's why you put zincs on, to prevent electrolysis to your shafts and your propellers, where you don't have that problem in the freshwater. Okay, testing methods. So there's core samples. And it's a good idea if you have any drilling, or your clients have any drilling on the boat, if they put in new hatches or they put in new through hulls, good idea for them to take that core sample that came out when they drilled that hole and show the prospective buyer, this is how thick the hull is. It's and the older boats, some of those the core samples are fairly thick. The newer boats a little bit thinner. And then of course moisture meters, audio gauge for steel boats, X-ray as well. And probably the most prevalent method for testing is the percussion method. So you'll see the surveyors out there with their hammers, or I've seen lately, they take a golf ball, they drill a hole in it, and they put a telescopic handle on it, and that you use that for percussion for the hull. Of course, penetration, if there's moisture, and another one, olfactory, which would be smelling. So you can smell mold, or you can smell different smells, especially on boats that are in the saltwater. They have a lot of smells, and sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad, especially when you have a sensitive woman coming on the boat and there are smells that are not pleasing to her. That's usually going to turn them off right away. So use a broker, need to be aware of those. And there's all kinds of other testing methods, visual and audio, and so be aware of those methods. Okay, alternative materials and methods. So most of the boats that were built pre-70s are built out of wood. So if you're selling wood boats, know the pros and cons. And some of the cons may be insurance. It's difficult to get insurance on a wood boat these days, especially in Canada. When I was up there, it's almost impossible for buyers to get insurance on wood boats, even if they came through with a great survey. The insurance companies are very leery of wood boats. And then there's a combination, the wood epoxy, the cold molding, know the pros and cons of that. For the same weight, it's lighter and stronger. There's less internal structure. And you have the male mold, and then the cost can be prohibitive on some of that as well. So be aware of the alternative methods and materials. Painting and coating systems, types of coating. So you have gel coat, which is fairly common in your fiberglass boats, polyurethane on some of the wood boats. You have enamels, acrylics, epoxy, etc. The list goes on. Just be aware of those different types of coatings. And then bottom paints too. You've got ablative, you've got the hard, not so much copper anymore, especially in California. Copper was outlawed many years ago. Some of the paint up in some of the other areas still has a little bit of copper in it, but know the difference between ablative and hard. So the ablative is the sloughing paint that never really dries. It comes off with scrubbing. So regulations and laws about application and removal. So you as a yacht broker, you need to know some of these regulations when the boat goes into the yard, that you're not going to violate any of those laws for application removal of bottom paint. Okay, basic knowledge of systems. So you have mechanical, propulsion, plumbing, hydraulics, pneumatics. There's that yellow again. Steering, thrusters, the HVAC, that's the heating and air conditioning, refrigeration, running gear, fire suppression, etc. And then the electrical, you've got the shore power and the house power. So know the difference, AC and DC, the generators, inverters, charging devices, solar, wind. Now they've come up with a new one called EFOI, which is energy for you. And it's, look it up on Google. It's the new technology that's starting to sweep some of the boating communities for adding power. It's helpful. I took a ABYC systems course recently, and normally ABYC has webinars and workshops for surveyors as well as technicians. But as a yacht broker, it's very helpful to take a systems course and learn about propane and electrolysis and the fellow I had, he was very creative. He created a situation where there was a stray current and showed the danger and the problem with stray current. And it was very informative. So I would encourage you as a yacht broker, if an ABYC systems course comes to your area, it's well worth the time to sit in and take the course. And you'll get a certificate as a yacht broker that you've attended the course and get credit for that. So I would encourage you to do that if you see that come in your area. So basic knowledge of systems continues. So you got the electronics and navigation equipment. You've got all kinds of new chart plotters out there with new functions, the Furuno, the Ray Marine, the B&G. They all work a little bit different, and you're going to see those on the boats that you sell. It's good to be familiar with that. MARPA, so that's the mini automatic radar plotting aid, target tracking, collision avoidance. So if you're selling boats with radar, and a lot of the new big boats have radar on there, it's good to be able to show your client how that works. And then the EPIRB, the emergency positioning indicating radio beacon. So not really important on an inland water lake, but if the boat is traveling offshore, EPIRBs are necessary. And the batteries need to be recharged about every 5 years. They need to be recertified. So if you're selling larger boats, be aware that that may be something you need to look into. And then the DGPS, so the digital global positioning system, be aware what WAS is, the wide area augmentation system, and the DSC, the digital selective calling, and the MMSI on some of the new radios. You may help your client there because that needs to be registered by the new owner, and you can walk them through the process to get their MMSI number so they'll have AIS capability on their boats. Be aware of the terms, topsides, know what dead reckoning is, know what deviation versus variation is. Maybe you've heard the acronym by the Coast Guard, true virgins make dull company. So you start with true, and then you have variation, and then magnetic. The difference between true and magnetic is variation. And then you have the deviation, which is a difference between the magnetic and your compass. So all compasses have error and need to have a deviation card. Know the compass and the chart and how to use them, and know what ABYC means, the American Boat and Yachting Council, and NFPA, the National Fire Protection Agency, and NEMA, the National Electronics Manufacturers Association, all agencies that help with boat building and keep standards high in the boats that we sell. Okay, so, and then continue with terms you'll see on the surveys and on the Yacht World requirements there, your LOA, length overall, the LOD, length on deck, that doesn't include the overhang, and LWL, loaded waterline, and DWL, design waterline. And be aware of those different terms and what they mean. Okay, yacht designs, you got different hull forms, you've got your different types. In the power part, you have sedan, the sports fisherman, the pilot house, the motor yachts, cockpit yacht fishermen, express cruisers, and you've got your planing hull, your displacement hull, your semi-displacement hull. And then with sailboats, you've got different classes, racers versus cruisers, and different keels. You got the fin keel, the full keel, the wing keel, the shoal keel. And then with rigs on your sailboats, you've got the sloop, the ketch, the yawl, the cutter, the cat, the fractional, and know the difference between standing rigging and running rigging. So standing rigging would be the cables, the shrouds, the backstays that hold the mast up, and your running rigging is anything that runs your sails. So your halyards, your sheets, your vane, topping lift, those are all part of the running rigging. Know about yacht design. So basic design criteria, terminology, what the righting moment means, the limit of positive stability, how they determine the center of gravity, the center of buoyancy, and the center of effort on your sails. Know what beam and draft and displacement mean, difference between dry displacement and wet. And the center of gravity is directly above the center of buoyancy when a vessel is floating balanced at rest. So be aware of all those terms and what they mean, and especially the ones that are highlighted in yellow. So technical standards and classification societies. So you've got ABS, American Boating Society. You've got the De Norse Veritas, that's Norwegian. You have Lloyd's, ARENA, Elegenic Registry, and the BV. And the value of construction standards. So standard setting organizations, the American Boating Yachting Council, the Fire Protection, CE, NMMA, the US Coast Guard, and CE, the Conformity for European Boats. So the ones that are there with the asterisks, non-regulatory, and continuously updated, ABYC. So those are not regulatory standards that ABYC puts out, but they are very much recommended. Most of your surveyors will go by ABYC standards. And so as you're having boats surveyed, you're going to find deficiencies based on those standards that ABYC has come up with. So operation and navigational skills, know basic seamanship, especially if you're doing sea trials. Good idea to know who's the stand-on vessel, who's the giveaway vessel, rules of the road, know how to operate the vessel, whether it's single screw, twin screw, directed thrust, and navigation. You don't want to be embarrassed and run aground on a sea trial. Make sure you know where the shallow water is. Make sure you follow safety procedures, as I mentioned before. Make sure everyone has a life jacket. Make sure there's a throwable device on board, a sound making device. And of course, you want to make sure you check the weather before you go out too. And embarrassing to go out there on a stormy day and have difficulties. Better to be safe and err on the side of caution and maybe postpone that sea trial to a better day. And know your nautical terminology. So that's very important as a yacht broker that you use the correct terminology on the different boats that you're selling. Well, here's another question that you'll see on the test. There's 4 different rigging plans for sailing vessels, and they include a ketch, a sloop, a schooner, and a yawl, which you'll see out on the water. Which one is the most common? I think that's a fairly easy answer there. The sloop. Sloop is the most common production boat made today. Beneteau, Jeanneau, Bavaria, Hunter, they are all been making sloops for many, many years. So sloop is the correct answer there. Okay, Trish, do we have any questions about what we've covered so far?
Yes, we do. We've got a few. Let's see. The first one states, with smaller vessels that are not required to document with US, CG, or foreign national residents in the US, could you touch base on what is the process and requirements for titling and registering the boat in e.g. the state of Florida? And also, is there a way to find out if there's a secret lien on the state title with these vessels?
Okay, again, as a yacht broker, I would rely on the titling company to do the research on that as far as registration and secret liens. They're the ones that have the capability of digging deep to find those secret liens, and they would know the regulations too. In each individual state is different. Florida has their own regulations, Washington State, Oregon, California. And your titling company is going to be the one that's going to be able to answer those questions specifically for your state.
Very good. Let's see. Please explain about true virgins make dull company. And then we have a deviation and variation question.
Okay. Okay, let's start with the true virgins make dull company. That's a Coast Guard. I took a navigation course with them. There's a more politically correct acronym called TV watching makes dull children. So the T would be true, and that has to do with true north on your chart. The variation, of course, is the difference between true north and magnetic north. So each area of the United States has a different variation depending on the pull to magnetic north. Here in the Pacific Northwest, in Puget Sound specifically, we have about a 17 or 18 degree variation. So when you're plotting a course on a chart, you have, of course, the compass rose. So true north follows the latitude and longitude lines, north and south longitude, east and west latitude. And then you have the variation, which cocks the magnetic north off several degrees. So each chart in your area is going to be a little bit different. I know in Florida, the variation is very, very small, but there are places where it can be 20 to 30 degrees. Let's see, makes, M is magnetic, dull is deviation. So each compass that you have on your boat is affected by cell phones, electronic equipment, maybe a toolbox too close to the compass. And so that all needs to be taken into account when you're figuring the deviation. And so a compass swinger with a Polaris will come onto your boat and reduce the error, which is deviation on your compass, and then give you what's called a compass card or a deviation card to tell you which direction you're going, how you need to correct that compass. So that's the TVMDC. And you had a question about deviation and variation?
I think it was just more, if you could elaborate a little bit in that.
Okay, so yeah, variation is the difference between true north and magnetic north, different for each area of the country. And the deviation is the difference between magnetic north, which on a handheld compass would not have a deviation, as long as you keep it away from cell phones, electronic equipment, or anything that's metal. But a compass on your boat is not portable, it's not able to be moved. And so that needs to be corrected. And that's called the deviation, the difference between magnetic and the compass.
Very good.
All right.
We have two more.
All right.
Can you confirm center of gravity is above center of buoyancy when floating and stable? Seems it would be opposite opposite of that. And what you said would cause instability. I think COG would be below.
Yeah, I would agree with that. COG would be below the decreased stability. And so you have to be a naval architect really to understand the physics and all that goes into that. But you need to be aware as a broker what the difference is between buoyancy and gravity, center buoyancy. And you don't need to be proficient in knowing exactly how that affects the vessel you're on. There are different places you can find that in, a lot of times in the blueprints of the boat. It'll give you the areas of buoyancy and gravity. Again, you don't have to be a naval architect or an engineer to figure that out, but just be aware of what those terms mean.
Excellent. And the last one, the guide as a matrix that implies USCG max size of recreational documentation is 65 feet. Is that what is meant? Is that what is this? What is meant?
I'd have to research that. I don't believe that that's true. Let me do a little research on that And if you could leave your name, I'll email you what I find on that. But that 65 feet, there's a lot of vessels over 65 feet. In fact,
Howard, let me know what page you found that on the guide as well, so we
yeah,
can
let me know
help
what, so
help
we
Tim a
can,
little bit.
we can do that because I operate a 76-foot vessel, which is documented, which is well over the 65-foot maximum that you're stating in the guide. So let me do some research on that, and I'll answer you specifically on that. Thank
Or
you.
make a note of that, Tim, so we can follow up with him after. All right, that's the last question. Thanks, Tim. We'll go on.
Okay, let's continue on with our next. We're about halfway done here. So let's see, transactions, our next topic. So references and transactions. So we've got a bunch of acronyms here. Let's go through those acronyms. So CPYB, of course, certified professional yacht broker. YABA, which is the Yacht Brokers Association of America. You got IBA, International Yacht Broker Association. NIBA, that's I'm a member of that as well, Northwest Yacht Brokers Association up here in Oregon and Washington and Idaho. And then you've got the, let's see, CYBA, so that's the California Yacht Brokers Association. And each one of those have their own codes of ethics. And depending on where you're at, good idea to be aware of what the code of ethics are for your organization. And then review the components of the standard association purchase and sales agreements as included in the guide. So I know each company has their own purchase and sale agreements. The guide has some typical forms in there. Each organization, CPYB, BCYBA, the British Columbia Yacht Brokers Association, they have their own forms. Good idea to be aware of those. As you're selling boats with other brokers, you're going to see all kinds of purchase and sales agreements. And I know the California is a little bit more involved than the one we use up here in the Pacific Northwest. I think it's 4 or 5 pages, where the one that we use up here is a 2-page purchase and sale agreement. So be aware of those, the differences. Review other association sales forms as included in the guide. So the guide will give you several different options there. Find one that works for you. I think simple is better. That's what I have found. On purchase and sales, sometimes they can get legalese, and you need to be a lawyer to understand all the terminology and the verbiage in there. So I tend to go with the simple. Okay, handling of funds, presentation, the deposit of earnest money. So make sure you have a process for that within your own company, whether the deposit goes to a trust account within your company, or if it goes directly to a title company. You need to have a good process there. Paperwork, again, checks and balances. And either you use checks or wire transfers. Some companies prefer wire transfers. A lot of times you're selling smaller boats. The process between the time that the boat is bought and delivered may not be enough time for that check to clear. So good idea that you have a wire transfer, certified checks. Make sure those funds clear. And again, the yellow on there, cleared funds. And usually the deposit is typically about 10%, and that can cover a brokerage fee, or it can cover a deposit for maybe a survey that the buyer says, hey, you didn't rent the boat the way it should have been, and I'm not paying for this survey. Well, you can't encumber the client of the seller with that survey fee, so somebody's got to pay for it. So usually that comes out of the deposit. That doesn't happen very often, but I've seen it happen a couple of times. Presentation of an offer. How do you deal with multiple offers on the same vessel? That's a tricky one. I've had several of those. come through and had some hurt feelings that, hey, I thought you said my offer was good. And well, we had a better offer come through at the last minute. So you've got to know how to deal with those and how to make sure everybody's represented. And ultimately, it is the seller to make the decision which offer he's going to receive. It's not up to you. Say you've got an offer coming through, one of your buddies in the office there, and another offer coming in as a co-broke. You can't give it to the person in your office. You've got to be partial, and it's up to the seller to make the decision which offer they're going to accept. Make sure the cleared funds, there's cleared funds again. That's very important. And checking the mail is not going to cut it. So you need to have the funds well within the time that's on the form, usually 3 days after you get an accepted offer. Those funds should be in the bank, should be in the trust account. So make sure that happens. Use a yacht broker. That's part of your responsibility. Okay, handling of funds continue, the breach of a contract or rejection of the vessel, return of the client funds, payment for survey expenses, make sure those are taken care of before the seller disappears, or the buyer disappears, I should say. Make sure those are taken care of, because otherwise, and it's happened to me, it comes out of your pocket. Somebody's got to pay for that. It's not going to be the seller. And make sure the payments at closing, make sure that your policy is it's either checks or wire transfer, and make sure that that is acceptable to your company. Multiple disbursements. So you've got, usually when they do a survey, they write a check individually. It doesn't have to come out of the deposit. The survey or the mechanical survey or the rigging survey, they should be paying those over and above the deposit. So again, the yellow here, payments made versus payments received. So make sure you have a receipt from that invoice that it's been paid, and double check. And certified checks versus bank drafts. You can make your decision on that, which is going to be the one that works for you. But be aware of what the difference is for the test. Okay, contracts, alterations, and acknowledgements by all parties. So anytime you have a change or an alteration, make sure it's initialed either on the purchase and sale agreement or on the addendum. And who or what determines how multiple offers are handled. So you need to have that set in stone ahead of time, so there's not going to be any hurt feelings. Hey, I thought you said you gave my verbal offer in. Well, they want it in writing. So make sure that's all taken care of ahead of time. So presentations, considerations, the identification of the parties of the vessel, make sure the name of the vessel is on the registry, the description of the vessel, the whole identification number, if it's a documented vessel, the official number, if it's a registered vessel. In Washington, we have what's called the WN number, California's CF. Make sure that's all on the purchase and sale agreement, on the contract, on the addendum, on all paperwork, so that you have the right vessel that lines up with that paperwork. Okay, contracts continued. You got email and PDF versus original documents. So recently, email and PDF and fax and scanned versions of the contract are acceptable. You've got DocuSign. If any of you use those, that's a great service for getting contracts signed and initialed. And then know about breach contracts and liquidated damages. Time is of the essence. And I would add to that, time is your enemy. So make sure that everything is done correctly. Try to get those transactions done as fast as you can. And make sure you know the buyers and nationality. If that buyer wants to document a vessel, say he's from out of country, and he wants to document as a U.S. Coast Guard. That's not allowed. You have to be a U.S. citizen in order to document a U.S. vessel. So be aware of that. So your broker responsibilities, schedule and coordination of events. You got surveys, sea trials, mechanical surveys, rigging surveys, showings. Make sure you're scheduling all that in a timely manner. Double check, triple check, make sure that the tide is good for when you want to do your haul out. I've had that happen a couple times. Schedule a haul out. Whoa, too low a tide. Can't haul it. So make sure you check all those things. Payments for the buyer related expenses, trust and earnest monies and contract deposits are all in. And the closing documents, like I said before, your title company should be in charge of all that. Make sure that they're doing their job. And survey reports, whose are they? Well, it's the person that purchased the survey. So usually the buyer is in charge of that survey. A lot of times they don't want it to be distributed unless they do get some funds. Usually 50% is a kind of rule of thumb that if the buyer walks away, he'll sell the survey for 50% to say the next party. So that's another option that you can go down that road. A lot of times they won't give it to you at all. Nope, you're on your own. Find a new surveyor. So broker responsibilities, conditional acceptance. I'm not real keen on that. Either you accept the boat or you don't. So it should be an acceptance of the boat. A conditional means, well, things need to be done. You know, how's that going to, who's going to do the work? What kind of quality control is there? So that's a little bit touchy on conditional acceptance. And how do they affect the contract? So there's your yellow again. Make sure you understand the difference on that between conditional acceptance and acceptance. And if agreed satisfactory repair and mechanisms, how are repairs checked, and what kind of holdback at closing. So I've done that at 10% holdback at closing until all repairs are done and inspected. So that's another option you have as a broker. So what happens if the documents are lost? State titles, Coast Guard documentation, foreign registries. It's up to you as a broker to chase down those documents and get replacements, get copies. So a lot of times you rely on the seller, but as a broker, the buck stops with you. You need to have those documents for when the boat goes to title. And we're going to talk about broker responsibilities, the selling broker and the listing broker. Some of those overlap. And like I said, it's a team. You're working together, and sometimes you're covering the other person's responsibilities, but you as a listing broker have certain responsibilities, selling broker have certain responsibilities. There's registry deletions, be aware of those. Vessel inventory and repairs, auxiliary vessels, tenders, jet skis, and you need to have all the HIN numbers for those dinghies, those jet skis, the outboard. Make sure you have an EPA number on that if it's going to a foreign country. That's a big deal with the border brokers. They want to have that EPA number. I had one come down the other day. It was a Yamaha twin 250s. There were no EPA numbers on the boat anywhere on the engines, and so it was a mess trying to get that boat across the border without that. So make sure you have all that ahead of time. And when you're listing a vessel, that's the time to get those numbers, not at the last minute where they're trying to close the boat and the documentation company's going, hey, I want those numbers. You need to have those ahead of time. So make sure you're aware of that. So, and the title company will take care of your liens, your secret liens. There's different types of liens and different ways to satisfy those liens. U.S. Coast Guard liens, there's all kinds of different liens that are possible that may pop up on a boat. your title company be able to find those. If corporate, company, and individuals know the difference, who's buying the boat? Is it buying? Is it a corporation buying the boat? Is it a married couple? Are they still married? Are they seller or buyer and co-buyer? And have all that on the contract. Or maybe you have a boat that's gone through an estate sale and the seller is deceased. Make sure there's a death certificate along with the listing on that as well. And then payments to sellers and lender payments. So usually that's all taken care of by the title company. Okay, another question you'll see on the test. Broker A submits a verbal offer on the vessel and is awaiting a signed contract to be returned from the buyer. At the same time, broker B obtains and presents a written offer to the seller. Who or what determines the final buyer? So maybe broker A is one of your buddies in the office and broker B is co-broke. Are you going to make that determination, or who is best? This is, and again, the best answer. So it's pretty obvious it's the seller. So the seller is going to make the best offer, but it's important that you present both to the seller, the verbal offer and the written offer. And it's up to him to make the decision whether he's going to go with the bird in the hand or the bird in the bush. So it's up to you to let him make that decision. That's not your responsibility. Okay, knowledge check, another one. Following the closing as a part of the transaction, the U.S. Coast Guard document is surrendered to who? And so again, the best answer here, so it's U.S. Coast Guard document, so they own the document, so it's the Coast Guard that you surrender the document to. Okay, usually that's done through the title company. Okay, Trish, any questions on this last section that we went through?
Yes, we do have a question. It states, do you need to be a member of IYBA to sell internationally if you are a member of YABA? And what are the benefits to be a part of IYBA? Are they reciprocal?
Okay, I'm a member of IBA and not a YABA, so I can't speak for YABA, but it's a good idea to be a member of IBA if you want to sell internationally. You're gonna have a lot more clout. You know, and then, like I said, if you're selling boats in Florida, you need to have a broker's license in Florida. You're selling a broker's license. If you want to sell boats in California, same thing. You need to be a broker in California. So I can't speak for YABA, but I know IBA is a great organization. And if you're going to sell boats internationally, I would become a member. It's well worth it.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim. No other questions have come in at this time.
All right, we'll move on.
Moving on.
Okay, getting into broker responsibilities. So intricacies of handling customs and Coast Guard documentation paperwork, managing deposited funds, tracking liens can often stymie a broker's best intentions and place a customer in a difficult situation. So you're required to have sound record keeping and open communications. And the knowledge of the issues and options puts the broker in a better control of the process. So again, I put a lot of that responsibility in that case on the titling company. They are the ones that are doing it every day. It's your job to make sure that they are following the procedure. And, you know, the buck stops with you, but a lot of that responsibility can be put onto the titling company. And find a good title company that works for you and high integrity, and they return your phone calls, and you'll go a long ways in having a great successful brokerage career. Well, listing broker. So your responsibilities initially are secure the listing agreement. And I had a client come in the other day and he wanted me to list his boat, and he wanted to know how much it was worth. And so I did some research on it and went into sold boats, found that it had been sold before and what he paid for it. And then I went to Yacht World, and lo and behold, his boat was already evidently listed. He was on Yacht World. And so I gave him a call and I said, hey, that, company B has already listed your boat. And he's going, no, they don't. They don't have a listing agreement. So just be aware that there are unscrupulous people out there that are putting boats on Yacht World, and they may not have a listing agreement. But as a listing broker, you're required to have a listing broker, whether it's an open, a central, exclusive listing agreement, you're obligated to have one of those. So don't just be putting boats on Yacht World that you don't have listing agreements for. So make sure you secure photos, whether it's from the owner or professional photographer or yourself. Layouts, descriptions, good idea to get a history of the boat. Why are they selling the boat? Who's owned the boat? How many owners? Where was it built? Where has it been? Good idea to get all those questions answered when you're listing the boat. And then develop an accurate inventory listing. So listed either on your site, Yacht World, whatever site that you prefer to use. And secure a copy of the ownership papers. So you don't want to have the originals, of course, in your files, but good idea to take a picture when you're on the boat. You can use a different Scan Pro is what I use. So you have a scan copy of the documentation of the registration, the dinghy registration, the dinghy HIN, get all that when you're doing the listing, the outboard. And secure the owner's declaration of condition. So in the company I work for, we have about a 5-page condition declaration that they have to go through and sign an initial on what kind of shape the boat's in. And so the good idea to get that ahead of time when you're doing the listing. Makes it much easier when you have prospective buyers come along and say, hey, what about this? And you can go back to the declaration of condition and say, okay, this is what the owner has told us. And in the pre-sale, the pre-listing surveys, that's a great declaration of condition too, because they have the items that need repair or found on the boat. So that's a great declaration of condition if you have a pre-listing survey. And you need to represent the seller's best interests and communicate all interests and all offers to the seller ASAP, both written and verbal. And then it's up to him to decide which one he's going to accept. So more listing brokers' responsibilities. You need to screen buyers and brokers. You get some unscrupulous brokers out there that you may not want to have on your boats without you being there. So you need to screen them as well as buyers coming through. Are they just looky-loos, or are they really serious about buying your client's boat? And protect the seller's boat. And don't just let anyone on the boat. Make sure you can verify that broker or the buyer is not going to damage the boat if he gets on there. Make sure you know the boat and location and access. The other day I was showing a boat for another broker in my office, and she gave me the location, but she didn't give me the code to get in. So it was behind a locked gate. So we had our fun trying to get in. Fortunately, there was another boater there and wanted to know what we were doing at that marina, and told them that we were down looking at a boat, and they wanted to know the name of the boat, where the boat was. So they finally let us in, but a good idea to have that ahead of time so that you're not fumbling when you get to that gate and go, well, what was that code? And let the owner know of any changes to the boat. So again, on this boat, I showed the boat, and we turned on some of the lights, and immediately the salon lights went off, flipped the breaker back on, and there was a short somewhere. So make sure that you're communicating back to either the owner of the boat or the listing broker. If you're not the listing broker, there are problems with that boat. And again, when you go on to a boat, make sure you turn everything off that you've turned on. If you've turned lights on or equipment, turn those off. And by all means, don't start engines or generators. You don't know if the seacock is closed. You don't know if the boat's being worked on. That's something I try not to do, is start engines or generators if I'm not sure that they're ready to be operated. And leave the boat in better condition than than when you came on. So if it's in disarray, maybe clean up the boat a little bit. There's garbage laying around, maybe pick it up. Leave the boat in better condition than when you got on. And let the owner know of market conditions, and make sure you're using the widest distribution for the listing. So that may be on several sites, Yacht World or other sites. Yachtbrokers.org is another one I use. And in publications, in print, maybe we have Northwest Yachting up here, latitude 38, 48 North, some of the other places where you can put classified ads. So try and get the best exposure for your client for their boat. More responsibilities: coordinate survey and sea trial. And that includes mechanical surveys, rigging surveys, and sea trial. Usually that you're able to operate the boat. If not, make sure the owner is there to operate the boat. If it's a complex boat, something that you're not comfortable with, make sure you get him involved too. Provide closing info. Know how to handle multiple offers. Again, here's multiple offers again. Make sure you have the commission split agreed upon before showing the boat. So again, in the guide there is the co-brokerage form, and each company has their own co-brokerage form. I've had several companies where I've had a client look at a boat, and the company says, no, we don't do co-broke. Okay, so I'll take one of my forms, fill it out 50-50 co-brokers, and then send in a bona fide offer, and usually they'll back down and say, oh, okay, we'll co-broker this boat. But make sure you have that agreed upon ahead of time, not after the fact. It's hard to get the horse back in the barn after he's gone. So make sure you have that co-brokerage form agreed upon before. And if you're not going to be there for the survey and the sea trial, then it's probably not going to be a 50-50. It's going to be probably a 60-40 or 70-30. And make sure you inform the selling broker of all pertinent events. So maybe the seller is going to use the boat on the weekend. Make sure that they know the boat's not going to be available to be shown. I have a boat right now that's in charter with a company, so it's been out almost all summer. It's really hard to show that boat when it's not at the dock. So make sure all your selling brokers know that that boat's not available. Okay, and we're going to moving on to the selling broker and his responsibilities. So as a selling broker, it's your responsibility to show the boat, make sure you get permission, gate codes, where the key is located, if there's a key or a combo, so you can get on the boat. And again, leave the boat in the same condition as found or better. Don't operate the machinery without permission. When you do get an offer, deposit 10% in writing, and that's fairly standard with most brokerage firms. And offer or the boat related questions submitted through the listing broker. So try not to get contact with the seller, try not to work a backdoor deal with him. That's a no-no. And work everything through the listing broker. So that's doesn't always work that way. And I found sometimes it is good to get the owner on a very complex boat that only he has the question. He only has the answers for the questions. So, but normally you don't want to have a contact with the seller. Go through the broker. Okay, commission splits agreed upon before, co-brokerage form, coordinate survey, sea trial, closing, make sure everybody's in agreement with that, create acceptance of yacht agreement in advance for the buyer. So have that all done ahead of time so you're not scrambling at the last minute, filling that out, have it filled out, ready to go. And so when they do have an acceptance of that yacht, you can send it right out and expedite the closing process. And then make sure you have a draft of the closing paperwork as well. Inform the listing broker of any events throughout the entire transaction. So if anything changes, you know, the water pump quit and the seller is going to get it fixed. Just make sure that's all communicated. And assist the buyer in all ways. So a lot of times the buyer will come in and say, who do I go to get mortgage? Where do I find insurance? Where do I find financial institutions that'll loan on boats? Not all institutions will loan on boats. There are only a few that do. So make sure that you assist your buyer in all your ways. Who's going to fix the boat when it breaks down? So have a list ahead of time that you can just hand to them and take care of that right off the bat. So clients' funds, trust accounts, and escrow and documents. Documents held in trust before closing. So that usually with documentation company. Do not release funds without authorization. Again, the documentation company that I work with will not release funds until all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. So define when the closing occurs according to the purchase agreement. And if you're not able to make that date, make sure you get an extension. I was with a client the other day and showing him the boat, and there had been a transaction on the boat had been pending. However, it expired. And so the boat was basically on the market again. And I had a bona fide offer, but somehow they got the transaction, revived it again, and were able to close even though it was out of contract. So just be aware, don't get out of contract. Make sure you have that extension filed well ahead of time if it's not going to meet the timeline of the purchase agreement. And no commingling of funds. So when the deposit comes in, that's made for the deposit of the boat. It's not made to pay for something else, for mortgage or whatever, but keep everything separate. And then again, here's your yellow again. Know the difference between escrow and trust accounts. So escrow would probably be an escrow company versus a trust account, like in your own brokerage firm. You have a trust account that deposits are deposited into, and sometimes they put it into an escrow. So know the difference between those two. Okay, another knowledge check. This is a question you'll see on the test. Which of the following is a listing broker not obligated to provide to the selling broker? So should give them deficiencies, photos, definitely vessel location and access. So the obvious one there is the survey. So the survey is the sole property of the seller, whoever ordered or paid for it, and the listing broker has no obligation to provide it to a selling broker unless specifically authorized by the seller or individual whose property it is. And a lot of times that survey is up for negotiation. Usually, like I said, rule of thumb about 50%. So if they pay $1,500 for a survey, they usually can pick it up for half price, $750, and they're willing to count their losses and sell it to a prospective buyer. So that works. Okay, any questions, Trish, on the broker's responsibilities?
We did have one question come in. It states, can you talk about some scenarios where an open versus central listing might be used? and they've never seen an open used. So they just wanted some scenario information.
Okay, yeah. So let's talk about the differences in what the definitions are. So an open listing would be a seller and other brokers. So say the seller has a buddy, an old Army buddy that was interested in his boat. And if he comes along, then you're kind of out of luck. He's going to sell it to his Army buddy. So that would be an open listing. Or other brokers are able to list the boat as well as you. So you'll see that on Yacht World. You may see the same boat listed by several brokers. I won't name any names, but there's one company that does that quite often, that you may see your listing on their site. That's an open listing. Okay, a central listing, which normally is done, that's a co-op. So you'll co-op a broker from another company to to sell the boat. And then there's also the exclusive listing, which happens quite often with smaller boats. There's not enough commission there for two brokers. And so the company has an exclusive listing and they sell that boat in-house, and they're not willing to share the listing with any other broker. So those are the kind of the definitions of the open listing, central listing, exclusive listing. Okay, any other questions, Trish?
No, sir. No other questions have come in.
Okay,
Thank you.
continue on. Okay, now we're moving into ethics. So that's always a touchy spot for some people. Shouldn't be, but it is. So certified professional yacht brokers agree to comply with the Certified Professional Yacht Brokers Code of Ethics. It is the best interest of the broker, the profession, and the clients. Operating ethically is not only good business practice, it is critically important to maintaining long-lasting business relationships and ensuring the professionalism of your chosen industry. Now, I know a lot of yacht brokers that come from car salesman background where there's not a whole lot of ethics, and I've met quite a few. And if they're not CPYB certified, they're kind of on their own, and there's not much you can do to hold them to the fire, the code of ethics. But if you do have other brokers that are CPYB certified and following the same ethics that you are, you know, they need to be held to account if they're doing things that are questionable. And so that's why we have the CPYB, is to make sure we're all on a level playing field. We're all playing in the sandbox with the same rules. So the ethics are understand the code of ethics that are listed in the guide between broker and broker, broker and client, relations with the public, and with yacht yards and industry and anybody that you're going to rub elbows with. And there is a dispute resolution. It's an arbitration system or a mediation. Generally, arbitration is a better way to go. And so there is a process within the CPYB to do that. I know within your own organizations, I know NIBA has their own resolution through arbitration program, and sometimes that needs to be used. So commission split, so there's industry standards, usually 50-50 if you're both working on there. If you're not involved in the survey and sea trials, then it may be a 60-40, 70-30, and that's usually spelled out right on the co-brokerage form. So say you come in with a 50-50 and then things happen, you're not able to show up for the sea trial or the survey, then the other broker is obligated to cover you. Then you should be willing to give up part of your commission for that. Disclosure, there's that yellow again. Make sure you know what that is. On the commission split, there's unusual circumstances, as in life. There's things happen that you have no control over. And then there's modifications to that. So be aware of all those items for the test. Okay, so there's different offers that come in. You've got a verbal and written offers. You have multiple offers. Offers after the purchase agreement has been signed by all parties to the agreement, backup offers. So all those offers need to be submitted, either written, emailed, or the original to the seller. And it's up to the seller to decide which one he's going to take. Okay, ethics continue. So you got the listing broker responsibilities and selling broker responsibilities. Be aware of the ethics that are spelled out in the guide. Okay, so listing broker responsibilities, disclosures of significant water, fire, structural damage. Again, I said if there's blisters and you know there's blisters on the boat, don't expect the buyer to have a out of the water survey to find those blisters. Disclose those blisters ahead of time. Let them know there is a problem with this boat. We're going to find it in survey and disclose that ahead of time. Make sure that you use the title and ownership questions. That's part of your responsibility. Who owns the boat? Is it a married couple? Is it a corporation? Make sure that you as a listing broker are aware of those. Disclosures of defects. If there's any unpaid bills, maybe he's got a yard bill that he hasn't paid. Make sure that that's disclosed. If there's any prior damage that you're aware of, the boat ran aground and was repaired, you're ethically required to pass that along. And if you are aware of any survey history, you don't have to provide the survey, but if there is any kind of history there, you're obligated as a broker ethically to pass that along. Okay, here's another question on the test. Which of the following is the broker's responsibility when listing a boat? So are you to gather pertinent facts from the seller, even negatives? Yeah. Disclose exclusions in the listing, determine any lien information on the vessel, or all of the above. So listing responsibility and obligation, both fellow broker and potential buyers, all the above, to provide the most complete and accurate information on the listed vessel as possible, even if the information contains negatives. So if there are blisters, let them know. Okay, any questions on ethics, Trish?
We have one question. When you talk about disclosure under commission split topic, are we talking about disclosing in the listing other than the normal 10% and the 50-50 split?
I think what it means, disclosures are if there are any negatives on the boat, that those need to be disclosed. And if you're talking about co-brokerage, that needs to be figured out well before you get an accepted offer. So as you're putting the offer in, put in the co-broke, disclose, okay, 50-50 is the agreed upon split of commission, and both parties need to sign that form. So hopefully it answers that question.
Very good. No other questions have come in at this time.
Okay, I think we're at the end of the presentation here. So your call to action is after this prep session is to register, to take the CPYB exam. You'll find the registration link at the CPYB website, and just click on exam, dates, and online registration. And then you need about 3 days for them to get it set up for a online exam for you. And give them a little bit of time to get that set up for your request. Okay, so this
Absolutely. Yep.
recorded, and there's the link that you want to go to. And then if you have any questions, send them right into certification@cbyb.net.
Yes, and we did have another question come
Okay,
in, Tim,
good.
If that's okay.
Sure.
Is all the information that has been received today in the guide? I would say yes, it's in the guide, and probably a little extra information is in the guide. This is an overview of the main topics that are in the guide. And then the presenters add in their own experience, which is extra helpful.
I would agree with that, Trish. Yeah, we didn't cover 100% of what's in the guide. I mean, you need to open that guide up and look in there. And we kind of touched on some of the highlights through this. You'd need a lot more time to do an exhaustive search. When I took my CPYB exam, we didn't have an online deal like this, a Zoom call. We had to go to an actual room, and it was very similar. And I don't think I was given hardly any information compared to what we've given you today. So this has been great. It's been evolving, and CPYB is doing a great job to try and help you guys get prepared to take the exam.
Well, thank you, Tim. And absolutely, yeah. Reach out if you have any questions at all. We definitely will respond and get back to you. We want to thank you, Tim, so much for your time today. And thank you for all the attendees that are on. Like Tim said, this will be recorded and it will be up on the website within a couple of days. You will also, as a reminder, be getting that quick survey via email. Please take a couple minutes to give us your feedback and let us know how we could continue to be better and serve you better. At this time, you guys, that is the end of our program. So you have a great rest of your day.
And good luck, everyone, to taking the test, and maybe I'll see you on the docks.
Thanks, Tim.
Bye.
Bye.